I think the first thing we'll do is just let you all introduce yourselves real briefly. You've got, is that mic working? Jean? Oh, we can start. Go ahead.
My name is Gene Robinson. Once upon a time, I was the Episcopal Bishop of New Hampshire, and in doing so was the first openly gay and partnered priest to be elected bishop in historic Christianity. So that's my little brick in the wall that we've built. And I'm delighted and humbled to be here with this bunch.
Good evening, everyone. Delighted as well, sir. My name is Ashley Smith. I had the pleasure of serving as the Capital Pride Alliance president of the board, as well as also the part of the board of HRC as well. So I do serve in both of those capacities, and it is such an honor to be a part of this particular event, because this is what we're talking about as we talk about Pride, and as we think of Stonewall 50 this year and the celebrations. All the prides throughout the country are really kind of working to make sure that we really don't forget the history of what we've come from. And the journey is still so evident in our communities, and there's so much that when we talk about coming together, there's still a lot of separation that we still have in our communities, and we have to work on ways to overcome those barriers and that. And I'm hoping that through the discussion today, we'll be able to do that a lot more. So I'm very excited to be here and thankful. All right.
Hi, my name is Rebecca York. I use she, they pronouns, and I am here representing SMILE, supporting and mentoring youth advocates and leaders. We are a nonprofit in DC that serves DC, Maryland, and Virginia youth ages 6 to 24. And we do this in a variety of ways, but I am honored to be on this panel with these folks tonight and excited to be speaking about these really important topics.
Hi, everybody. I want you to know we can't see you, first of all. So we're just talking to the light and ourselves. So my name is Sheila Alexander Reed. I'm director of the Mayor's Office of LGBTQ Affairs here in the district. But before that, I was a longtime activist and advocate on behalf of first Black lesbians, women of color, people of color, and now LGBTQ in the District of Columbia. And that shows up in a myriad of ways. It could be helping homeless youth find housing. It could be helping transgender women of color find safety. It could be helping any LGBTQ resident find work. So I like to say that I work with the most marginalized and the most privileged. And I'm privileged to be here.
Hi, everybody. I'm Star Bennett. I'm the CEO of Checker Enterprises. A little bit about myself. So we had a gang called Check It. We used to be down Gallery Place. We formed the gang to protect ourselves. I had over 400, 500 members with us from the Maryland, D.C., and Virginia area. I got locked up for 3 years, came home, met up with Ron. Me and Ron doing a lot of work right now. He's my co-partner, so we did a documentary. We have our own business. We have our own business now, our own building. It's called Checker Enterprises. It's right down the street, 1920 Martin Luther King Avenue. I make clothes, shorts like this, come and get y'all shorts and stuff. Y'all can do it online. We have event space. We have a lovely secret garden out back of our thing. Everybody will enjoy. And that's it.
Well, why don't we just sort of jump right into this? Just to bounce off what Ashley was saying, I'm working on Stonewall 50, the World Pride celebration and events and marches and rallies that are happening in New York City in late June. But it's really a national, international phenomena. But I think it's also a moment for our community to really reflect on something. And I'm always so struck by the way it's talked about in the film and by this. The individuals here represent just so much leadership in our community. But I think we have that continuing challenge of dealing with the fact that our community is so diverse. As I often say to journalists, because I work with journalists a lot, our community is like a microcosm of the larger culture, and what brings us together, often many identities, makes it very challenging. So how do we sort of continue to work together when our community is so diverse and coming at and approaching issues in such diverse ways?
Well, I think first and foremost is really a lot of it goes back to education. We have to educate our members of our community, but also those who are our allies of our community, to really make sure that everybody's aware of the struggles and the places where we do come from. As we talk about diversity, we are very diverse, and we have a lot of different experiences, and all of those experiences are a part of our movement, and we can't take one experience away from another person and say that, oh, well, their experience is not as bad as mine, or whatever the case may be. We have to talk about collectively how all of our experiences have made the movement that we have today, and how we can continue to move forward together and not focus on the division that we may have, but to focus on and the diversity that we may have, but to focus on how we can be united to overcome those particular challenges that are facing our community, because those who are against us are against us all. It doesn't matter if we're black, white, or anything else. It's really, truly, those who are against LGBT movement overall are against us altogether. And as we can tell from the video, but also before that time period, of the struggle that so many people gave their lives for. And we shouldn't take that as stuff in vain. We really have to focus on how we can build their lives up and really share their story further out. And it's really sad sometimes when we think about some people who don't know the basic history of our movement and where we've come from to get to where we are today. And just from the history that is here, there's a lot of very unique history and past that have happened. And that's the type of stuff that we need to go out in our community and continue to share. So that education is where I feel that we first have to start with.
I'll jump in. I would say that we have to each acknowledge our privilege, whatever that looks like, and you have to revel in acknowledge there's a certain level of uncomfortableness that's going to be in the room once you talk about privilege. And for those of you who don't know, I recently was given a definition, and privilege is, this is a great definition. Privilege is invisible to those who have it, first of all. And also, privilege is not caring about things that don't matter, that don't affect you. So first and foremost, when you talk about diversity, you have to be sure that you're always centering the marginalized. And you have to acknowledge your privilege. I have privilege as a college-educated black woman. I have privilege as being cisgender versus transgender. Everybody has some sort. If you have one leg, you may be more privileged than somebody with no legs. There's always a level of privilege that you have, and you must always acknowledge that. And when you acknowledge that, then you make room for others to come and join you. And I know that's one of your other questions about who to have at the table, but you must always center the marginalized and make sure that they have a voice. And sometimes that requires that you have to step back so that they can step up.
The one thing that I would add is that this is a question that comes up a lot in terms of the youth that we work with who want to become advocates, who want to become activists in their communities, and they're not sure how, or they're not sure how to use their privilege for good, or they're not sure how to really get over this question and begin taking action. And we like to turn them back to the activists that came before them, specifically Audre Lorde and Bell Hooks and all of these black feminist writers who said that it is in centering difference that you actually build power, because it's acknowledging that each person is bringing what they're bringing to the table, and everyone has these privileges that affect them every single day, and privilege is something that changes and shifts depending on where you are and who you're with. And if you're able to acknowledge that difference, and the fact that that difference is gonna change inherently, that opens the door to start the conversation in a way that needs to be done in order to actually progress towards making change.
And this also brings up, kind of the buzzword of intersectionality. We've been using the word intersectionality a lot more, but it's almost like we struggle to find a way to talk about intersectionality without using the word intersectionality, and instead trying to talk about multiple identities. Could any of you speak a little bit to sort of?
Yeah, I would like to say something about that. And a little bit on the last question. For the white LGBTQ community, the most maddening thing for me is how little white gay men have learned from their experience of oppression and discrimination. You would think they would make the connections, but at the end of the day, white privilege on a good day, white supremacy on a bad day, infects all of us. It's how we were raised, and it seems to me that the white gay community, particularly the gay male community, has got a lot of work to do on its own stuff, right? And that's nobody else's responsibility but ours. On the intersectionality thing, I'll just say two quick things. One is, I think the way I say it without using the word is to acknowledge publicly that most of what I understand about how our movement has progressed over time, I learned from studying and being a part of the civil rights movement for African Americans. Like almost everything that I understand about our movement, I learned there, right? So it's not that the experience is the same, but I try to acknowledge that. The other thing, let me just tell a very quick story. I decided I had to go to Ferguson to better understand what had happened there. And while there, I'm at the, if you've been there, you know that there is a sort of a memorial on the yellow line that separates the two lanes in the highway where Michael Brown was shot. And it's got teddy bears and it's got flowers and all kinds of stuff. At the very end, there's this tall box, cardboard box. It's been painted black. And in gold letters on it, someone wrote, they tried to bury us. They didn't know we were seeds. And I thought, holy crap. Like, why haven't I heard that before? So I did what any good red-blooded American would do. I Googled it, and it came up in multiple places as a Mexican proverb. And it was used in the state of Chiapas by the Zapatistas in their revolt, which was more about poverty, right? There was one Google entry that mentioned a Greek poet. I looked it up, and in 1950, a gay Greek poet was ostracized for being gay in Greece and wrote, "They tried to bury us. They didn't know we were seeds." So it had made its way from Greece in 1950 to Mexico to Ferguson, Missouri. And that's intersectionality, right?
Can you repeat the question again?
It was really, it's sort of an open-ended question about how, I mean, there's a lot of discussion about intersectionality. In fact, you may have seen there was some news reports that Mayor Pete actually made a comment that caused a little bit of a stir, as an openly gay white candidate for president said that the Democrats are too invested in identity politics. I might be paraphrasing a little, but that was essentially the gist of it. And I have to say, I mean, I'm thrilled to see an openly gay candidate, and I'm thrilled to see someone challenging Mike Pence around faith issues, but I'm not happy to see a gay white man, essentially say, identity politics. Because I think, again, like you said, Jean, a lot of the racism and sexism that I've seen has come from the gay white male community in ways that I'm saddened by, shocked by. So how do we deal with that? How do we help people address that and do the work that they need to do themselves? It is kind of a responsibility, I think, of the larger community, whether we like it or not.
Well, I have a friend, and my friend, his name is Dede. So he went on, what is MLK right here? So yeah, this ain't okay. So he went to the barbershop beside the bank to get his haircut. He said he always go there, and it was some man in there. So he said when he went in there to get a shape up, the man was like, "Oh, I don't do queen's hair." He really said the terms of faggy. So my friend said, "What you mean you don't do my kind of hair or whatever on the third?" He was like, "I don't cut your kind of hair. You have to go to somebody else." It was only one person. I mean, it was only one barber at the time, which it was him in there. So yeah, he was very upset about that. He came back down to the checker store, and and I definitely he told us. But he said that he ended up telling the owner, which is a lady, and she said that, it's nothing that she can do about that. So I'm like, oh, wow.
Let the D.C. government step in for a minute. There is something she can do. And there's something you can do. Have Day call me. You have my number.
All right.
So that's a perfect segue to D.C.'s protections. It is illegal to discriminate in the District of Columbia on 19 different traits or facets in sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression are 3 of them. So it is illegal. Illegal. It's discrimination in its truest form. So, and I don't think it's so much on the barber, but it's on the business. So please call me. And I was going to say about intersectionality, for those who don't know, it is not sort of where East meets West, or it's not intersectional. It's talking about being discriminated on a number of fronts. So there's an exercise I like to do, and I would like to see if you all would join me in this interactive exercise. So if you've ever been discriminated based on your gender, I'd like you to stand up. No. Yes, stand
Me
up.
too? Okay.
Have you ever been discriminated because you were a woman or a man, or non-binary? If you've ever been discriminated based on your race, remain standing. Stand up. If you've ever been discriminated based on your gender, race, sexual orientation, or gender identity, remain standing. So look around to see who remains standing. That is intersectionality. Come on, we can sit down now. And that is what I do to show people it is not just because I'm black. It's not just because I'm a woman. It's a multiple things. I could go on. Keep standing if you've been discriminated based on ageism or disability. I mean, it goes on and on because there's so many layers to discrimination. It's not just one thing. Very often it's multiple things, and we don't often see it.
So, jumping off of that, one of the brilliant things I think about the word intersectionality, and something that I think often gets overlooked as it becomes more mainstream, is the fact that intersectionality is a term that was given to us by a black woman defending a black woman in the name of holding power to accountability. And I think that is something that is incredibly powerful. And yes, it's become this academic term that's been laden with jargon and all of this other meaning that's been put on it afterwards. But to empower young people, specifically young LGBTQ people of color, to own all facets of their identities, and because LGBTQ folks are at the intersections, the youth we work with are disabled, they're homeless, they are all of these other identities that also aren't represented. And to give them a word that says you're seen, and actually you're not just seen, you can do something with this, you have power, and when you use this term, people will listen to you. That is an incredibly powerful thing. So as we critique the term, as we think about its implications as it's being used in all of our media facets that we're on today, and as it becomes used by white gay folks who are cis-identified, I think if we root ourselves in its origin and its original purpose, we find that it still has a lot of work that it can do, and it has a lot of work that we can use it for.
And so many times, I think that people don't really understand what intersectional or intersectionality really truly means. I think what you did, Sheila, was really, really great. But I think that a lot more people don't understand the true essence of that. And that goes back to the educational piece to a degree, but we really have to understand the true essence of that and really be in those places where we were talking about privilege earlier, be in those places where it's going to be uncomfortable. And to have those types of conversations with those who are your friends, they'll be your friend afterwards or they may not be, But it's the time for us to start living authentically ourselves and be truthful with one another. And we do have a lot that we can learn from one another if we sit and take the time to listen. But so many times we just assume and we use these phrases that are being used out so much in the secular environment that we really don't get to the nuts and bolts of what's going on and what's really impacting our community. And I think that is another piece when we talk about the intersection. We really have to have some true dialogue. And we do these things, this particular type of event and other events like this, and we go in, we do it, we talk for about an hour or two, and then you leave it, and you may remember some of it, but I hope that everybody walks away with at least one piece that they remember from it. But more importantly, it is what is it that you do with what it is that you have learned from it? And how do you share that out further within our community? Because somebody else needs to hear it. Obviously, this is not everybody in our community here, but someone else needs to hear that piece of that knowledge that they need to have that they may not have gotten beforehand.
Well, I think there are some perfect examples of individuals on this panel, and I'm sure in the audience, of you getting outside your comfort zone and outside your community. I remember being at a rally once. It was a rally against, it was very early in the Trump administration, the first Muslim ban. And it was a large coalition of LGBT groups and Muslim organizations, and a reporter was standing near me and said, wow, that's really great that the LGBT community is standing with the Muslim community. So I did what my mother always told me, which is I counted to 10. And I said, do you not think that there are queer Muslim people? And, and it's like that sound of bing, the light bulb, How do we do that? How do we get outside? Or if you give me an example of how you and your work, because all of you have done this, have done that. Because I think everybody in the room can do that, and just, the ripple effect of that can be tremendous.
I was working on a group, I think it was called Freedom for All Families, and we were trying to get marriage equality passed in D.C. And we started off with domestic partnerships and civil unions, and we equated the LGBTQ rights movement with the civil rights movement and got a lot of pushback from the black community who, based on homophobia. Mm-hmm. And, they felt that they had fought this incredibly long struggle, and how dare we say that we were a part, that we can, equivocate the two. So that was the first time that I had to let my people realize that I'm black and gay, and therefore I can be part of that struggle, and therefore I can equivocate the two because I am part of both of them. And that was the first part. And then the other thing that we had to do in order to get that passed was to really sort of cast a wide net. You have to go just beyond the LGBTQ community if you want to get something passed. And we got the religious community, the clergy, to talk to clergy who was homophobic. Reverend Wiley right there was front and center as one of the clergy who was able to meet with other clergy. And I believe it was very effective because, clergy may not listen to us, but they may listen to other clergy. And so it was the same way when Martin Luther King and Bayard Rustin were trying to put together a movement. They went to the union, they went to the Jewish community, they went to the black community, they went to the white community, they went to the Latinx community. So you have to really cast a wide net. And that's what we did to get marriage equality in D.C. We had clergy speaking to clergy, and I remember one of the things that I learned at a meeting was, if you are not openly, if you're not rampantly opposed to this and you're on the fence, we just ask that you stay home. Just don't vote against it. And that was a very effective approach that clergy had with clergy. Because some people were like, I don't care what they do. But they, we tend to go along with whoever the loudest in the room is. So what they were very effective in doing is minimizing that loud voice so it became a squeak. And we were able to overcome it. So again, round of applause for Reverend Wiley. He did that.
Did anybody else have something they wanted to add?
Yes, I can speak on that. So, All right, so this like a little. We used to be down gallery, so I'm taking it back down to the checker wise. I mean, like the other day, we used to be down gallery place. So the whole thing of formal out game is for protection. So we used to wear anything like booty shorts all the way up to here. We have so many males, female with all types of different clothing, and we used to go to the club. It was a lot of straight boys, it was a lot of Muslims. I mean, it was like all type of races and stuff in there. So we was always the attention. We always had so much colors and stuff like that. So we walk up to the club, they already knew it was us. So like, yeah, a lot of people didn't like that because we didn't care what we wear, and I guess it made them mad because I guess they wanted to wear it down low, but they didn't. But we didn't care. So like, yeah, as we started going to the club, like a lot of attention always was on us. So like, that's how we always fought so much. But in the midst of fighting and still coming back to the same club, it was the respect. All the Muslims and a lot of boys started respecting us so much. It's like, yeah, they wanted to be with us. So we started having like boy checking members with us. And we had a lot of Muslim boys with us too. So it was a lot. So yeah, we had a big movement. Like, when I say it wasn't just our LGBT, I mean, like, it was like a lot, like yeah, we had a lot of straight people behind us. And like, it was like a whole crew called Fly Money. And it was all straight boys. But they wanted to be able to check it. So they wanted to be our checking boys. So that's why I said, man, we could do it like we just changed the lives like, from us to going there. I guess before they thought we wasn't coming back, we came back. They was like, oh, well, they're not scared. We might go ahead and join them. So we started coming in together and stuff now, like in a line, talking, like playing, like still with our booty short skirts, lipstick on it, everything. So.
Living freely.
Take me as I am.
So the thing that I wanted to add to that too is that being a preacher's kid. So being a preacher's kid and going through the experience of creating those spaces, it took me a long time to ever actually deal with who I was and accept who I was. I've been out, I would say, for the last 10 years or so that I finally accepted and finally told my parents that was not an easy situation. And you know, that particular situation created a place where my father and I did not talk for a period of time because of his belief of being a minister who he never preached against homosexuality as far as some of the other churches that I've been to, but being a minister who was not accepting of it. And he could not fathom that his son would ever be gay and to be with another man. He just couldn't understand that. I mean, he took me to places because I was young enough to still go to church or to the hospitals where after the AIDS epidemic came out and was really kind of having an impact on our community, and to go through the experience of saying, you know, this is what happens to men who lie with other men. So that was a very huge blowback for me because I was, at that point in time, never did I ever want to think about being with another man or anything of that nature. And I always had my girlfriends and stuff like that. So therefore I went through that. Let's fast forward to 2011. And this is still, I had just come out, I had been out for 2 years, and I was with HRC at the time, and I was co-chairing the national dinner, and this was the one year that President Barack Obama was going to be speaking. And my father and I had not been speaking for probably a good 6 or 7 months prior to that point, if not longer. And he called me and he was like, hey, I really want to come to this, support you. You're my son, I still love you, but I don't approve of what you do in your life. He came to that dinner, and he was in tears the entire time. And for him, my father now is 88 this year. And for him to finally turn to actually come back to the HRC dinner the next year and has been engaged and always is asking me what's happening in the community, it took a long time to get there, but it opened a door. And he now, as best as he can in his environment in the clergy world, he does tell the story, maybe slightly different than mine, because he has a different approach to it, but he does at least, he starts to have the conversation with other people who've been men of cloth, if you will, for such a long time, or women of cloth, who have such beliefs against it, and that he started to open that up. And I mean, granted, he was with the Presbyterian Church, who was definitely transformative at a certain point in time, the Presbyterian USA. So it just was an experience, and that was a door that was opened that so many other people don't have that or have had a hard time doing that, and it has now allowed him to open up to so many more people, which I appreciate, and I'm thankful that we still get along and we talk now. So, but it took a long time to get to that place.
I'd like to bring Marilyn Bennett and Gil Caldwell into the conversation. Please, a round of applause for their work. Woo! I was privileged to see a little behind the scenes. This film was clearly a labor of love, love for each other, and love for the project, and I think love for the impact that it would have. And so, is there anything you want to add before I go to the next question?
I do. I'd like to ask Star a question. Actually, it's to get back to something you told me today. And you were saying that Check It really wasn't a gang, though they've called it that. You were a family.
Yes.
Could you say something about that? Because, I mean, I think that's kind of what we're getting at here.
Yes, so during our, I guess, what everybody called it was a gang, so we never considered us as a gang. We always, well, me personally, I always considered us as a family. When I started in the group, it was always for protection. Me personally, I never experienced neglect. I never, like, homeless, like, none of that. All my friends, like, did, like, I never been robbed, like, I never been alive, like, I'm not gonna say I always had it, but I mean, I just never experienced none of that. But a lot of my friends did for some reason, and they always came and told me. So like, we ended up forming our group, and everybody always called it a gang and labeled us as a gang because of what we was doing, fighting, and they always say we terrorized, got replaced. That was just I guess the famous thing that the news reporter loved to say is Check It gang members and stuff like that. We was never a gang. We was always a family.
Let me jump in there because I interviewed Check It when they first started, and they were known as a gang, and and that is because they were also known for fighting so well. People were always surprised at how good effeminate men could fight. These people were fighting for their life every day. They were, if not homeless, housing unstable, meaning couch surfing. You know, if Star had a couch and somebody was on a, weren't even considering themselves homeless. But they had to fight to survive each and every day. And at some point, just like we heard in the video, there's going to be a tipping point where you can't take anymore. So at some point they said enough is enough and started fighting back. And typically, when the marginalized are attacked and fight back, they're considered the aggressor. They were not the aggressor. They were protecting themselves. And so it was a really wonderful thing when Ron Moulton got involved and took what was known as a gang, and they then became a fashion moguls who now have their own fashion line and fashion store down the street. So I'm really proud of Star.
Thank you.
Woo! Full disclosure, Check It is one of our grantees in the Mayor's Office of LGBTQ Affairs because of the work they do with homeless youth, and they do an amazing job. So I just want to jump in there and give you a little plug.
Go ahead, Gil.
Yeah, well, let me say this. Marilyn, of course, came up with the title of our film and asking the question at the end, are we there yet? And it's obvious that we are not. And I think that's where I find myself at this point, to simply raise the question, first of all, how do you define there? Now, some of you remember what Gertrude Stein said about Oakland. There is no there there. But how do you define there? It's sort of getting at that. I mean, my own personal example is this. When in the 70s, an Episcopal priest whose name was Malcolm Boyd came out of the closet. He was a great civil rights activist, et cetera. I found myself hesitating to deny that, in fact, he had an impact on my life. And I'm still trying to figure out, why did Gil Caldwell, the civil rights activist, hesitate when someone who had an impact on his life said publicly that he was a same-gender loving person? And I find myself asking, was it the Bible? Is it in my DNA? Or whatever. And I guess I think because of the rescinding of stuff that's happening, we've got to sort of ask ourselves, from whence comes this? That's one thing. And there's a couple of things for the panelists. I loved it. I heard clothing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Years ago, when I moved to a place called Algebraic Park near Ocean Grove, a very gay-friendly place, I tried to somehow develop in my own non-artistic way not only a rainbow flag, but the Black Liberation flag, and sort of put them together. And I just wonder, is there any kind of symbol that symbolizes intersectionality, and whether or not, who was the artist on the stage up there?
Yes.
That's what I thought. So that's it.
The Philadelphia
Okay.
flag, yeah.
And then the final thing is that I think the bishop said this whole matter of seeds. I think one of the missing ingredients in our struggle is that persons do not really communicate that they believe very deeply that the African American experience in America, here we are 400 years from, of course, the slaves arriving, that in fact the seed reality of the American experience. There are persons who, of course, reach out and want us to become allies, but it seems, I think that the black community, both within my United Methodist Church, and I wish this group could somehow address the United Methodist Church with our problems, but somehow one of the ways to cross bridges, I think, is for us to acknowledge that whole seed imagery, how in fact we seed each other. And I guess that's the kind of thing that I hope I'd like to say at this point.
Did you want to talk about the Philadelphia flag real fast? 'Cause, Gil, there actually is an answer to that question.
Okay, I heard, in Philadelphia, was it Philadelphia P flag that added a black and a brown stripe to the flag? And I wonder what difference did that make? What is different in Philadelphia because of that? Is there greater inclusiveness? But rather, is there a way of us to symbolize what we're talking about in some kind of logo, or is it already out there in terms of this whole idea of intersectionality? It would be interesting. The things, the isms that we've got to wrestle with, I think, racism, sexism, heterosexism, classism, and capitalism. And how you sort of get at that is, of course, the important kind of thing.
So I can speak from the work that I do with young folks. The Philadelphia Pride flag has been adopted as that symbol. Largely when folks hear about it, they're like, oh my God, this is what we're using now, right? We're not going back to the old one. And it's because they are seen and because they are represented in a way that other pride flags, while they're wonderful, only tap into one aspect of their identity, whereas this flag begins to understand that there are many other layers.
And there was also, I remember on social media when it was first out there, I was thrilled when I saw it, put it on my Facebook page, and there were some folks who said things that were not quite so supportive, let's just put it that way. And it doesn't surprise me, but it shocks me. And so I think it's helped, promote some conversations, like all of these things should. We're going to open it up to questions. There might be some questions coming in online, but I see a very dear friend and amazing activist, Mr. Phil Pinnell, has a question.
Yes, thank you. I'm a graduate of Fordham University in New York City, and I was in Greenwich Village both of the nights of the Stonewall riots. And at that time in New York City, there was very little racial integration in the gay bars. When I was hanging at the bars in Harlem, the only two bars in the village that blacks went to were Danny's and the Bonsoir. And I went to Bonsoir. And that night, the first night of Stonewall, people ran to the bar, because Bonsoir was a few blocks away from Stonewall, and said, the cops are once again messing with the Queens, and they're fighting back. We need your help. And so all of the bars emptied out in Greenwich Village that night, and we were all there cheering on, etc., and which was a good thing. The second night, and I'm going to be very honest about this, was some really inexcusable wanton violence on the part of a number of gay people in the village, where they just went around and just broke windows well, that happens when oppressed people, they'll just strike out. But the second night, it was not a good thing. And then 2 weeks later, there was a rally in Central Park to bring the gay and lesbian community together. And a fight literally broke out on stage between the radical lesbians and some of the drag queens. The issue was the most prominent drag queen at that time, her name was Sylvia, who was at Stonewall, and she talked about how the drag queens were the ones who really fought back, and yet they were getting short shrift in terms of how they were being dealt with. And then there offensive that is in terms of white folks imitating black people in a very negative way. What is the thinking of particularly lesbians about that issue that was raised just immediately after Stonewall about how men impersonating women was in a way a form of degradation? Because they caused it quite literally.
They're looking at us, Sheila.
I'm about to say,
Could ask the older lesbians
I'm
here.
about to say, I'm not old enough to know that answer.
No comment.
But it is interesting to hear that history. Rebecca?
So this is something that I get asked a lot. I go out into the community and do cultural competency trainings around LGBTQ identities, but specifically around issues of gender, which there are great generational divides in how it's perceived. First, I think the best place to start is to say that radical lesbians of the 60s, 70s, 80s were a very specific and very small group. They were by no means representative of all of the lesbians who were organizing at the time and represent a very specific politic that is enshrined in that era. But the transphobia is still in effect. And in a lot of ways, it goes back to just not understanding and not wanting to open yourself up to understand. Because now we have the language and we have the experiences that have come to the forefront of conversations around LGBTQ identities that say, Sylvia Rivera, who I think is who you're referencing, Sylvia Rivera was a woman, full stop. We acknowledge that now. She was a woman. The language at the time wasn't ready to acknowledge that. And the organizers of the time, the organizers who were following in the footsteps of Mattachine and Daughters of Bilitis, and all of these more institutional groups in LGBT organizing, weren't ready to talk about gender beyond the very biological binary that they were brought into. But now we understand that gender is a spectrum, gender is fluid, just as sexuality is fluid. So while there are still folks, and you'll see it generationally, you'll see it across race lines and class lines, that people aren't necessarily at the point where they understand gender as a full spectrum beyond the binary, and aren't ready to embrace that or do the work of learning how to interact with folks who identify across that spectrum. It is something that's being pushed towards the forefront, and it is something that I feel like I can say everyone up here is working towards, and I'm sure organizers across the country are working towards acknowledging and recognizing and owning the fact that our history did come from trans women.
And I think even the organization, STAR, they used the word transvestite. There wasn't the language that we have now around trans issues. Although I will say something that I think is something that we don't talk about nearly enough, which is how much of homophobia is rooted in sexism, including internalized homophobia. Because I see that within the gay male community where, you still see sort of a minimizing, diminishing of gay men who are more effeminate. And, I sort of have experienced in the past sort of that it's so interesting that, like straight guys who will, kind of buddy up to me because of how I look. And I'm like, well, just because I'm kind of guyish doesn't mean I'm a jerk, It's an interesting thing, but it's important to look at, and it was that hatred of the feminine, and I think some of those radical feminists had a lot of internalized sexism themselves,
And trauma.
and hatred of the feminine,
And trauma that they didn't
Absolutely,
process.
absolutely, yeah.
Became
Question,
flipped.
what is radical? What is y'all talking about? Because I wasn't,
Radical?
yeah, what is that? I know I wasn't
Maybe
born.
extreme.
Very extreme, yeah, like
So, like radical lesbians
Hardcore,
specifically.
hardcore, really
yeah,
hardcore,
Really,
yeah.
really hardcore, stuck in their beliefs.
Okay.
I think Marilyn wanted to, go ahead.
I think that it's also something we've been talking about all night, and that is about our thinking that there's a scarcity there's a limited supply of justice, and there's a limited supply of visibility. And in some ways, it's not expanded to all people. But so, well, you're going to take my time. If I let you up there and speak, you're taking my time. You know, and I think that that's the thing about sharing power and sharing a stage, is that we have to be able to see that we can push those edges.
So I get to speak to a lot of mostly straight audiences, and I love to play with them around this, which is I start listing off the letters, you know, L and G and B and T and I and Q, you know, and I always then say, although I haven't checked the papers this morning, there may be a new one, right? Always gets a laugh, and then I say, but here's the point. We are realizing finally that 2 buckets labeled male and female are just not sufficient to describe the complexity and the diversity within our community. And then I say, so what letters should we use about you? Are you just like one big glob of heterosexuality out there? Is there no diversity within your community? Like, what, you know, so like, go off and talk amongst yourselves and get back to me about what letters we should use for you. I mean, that's the kind of discussion that is possible because of what our community has done. It actually could free everybody.
Exactly.
And ultimately, and then the last line is, ultimately where I think we're going is that there are as many sexualities, plural, as there are human beings. Because no 2 of us have had the same set of experiences that makes us who we are, right? And wouldn't that be a wonderful world where just being you would be just fine?
I want to jump in and make sure we don't leave this stage without talking about the current assault that we are all under with the current administration. And we talk about from Selma to Stonewall. So many people I know, back in the day when LGBT rights were at its peak, and I'm going to say maybe 80s, 90s, and they were like, well, you know, I don't know what you all are, why you need special rights. And similarly, I know a lot of young black youth who, I could never have been a slave. They would have just had to kill me. I couldn't pick no cotton out. And so these are the same people who now are looking at their civil rights being rolled back. And now when we're talking about LGBTQ people, a lot of millennials who don't understand what we have gone through are now seeing the advances that we fought for being rolled back. So my point is, now you can imagine what it's like to be a slave. Now you can imagine what it's like to be Sheila Alexander Reid in the 70s, 80s, 90s, suffering from homophobia, because it's coming back. Because if you do not pay attention to your past, it will be repeated. And so I think it's really important that we all take a pause and ask ourselves, and I believe Mr. Caldwell pointed out, why is that happening? What role are we playing in that? Am I right?
Yep.
Yeah, let me add to that, of course, is that I think this is a time when all of us must remember, some of you know the words, a man named Martin Niemöller, a German who had been a Nazi but became a pastor, but has those great words, when they came for the Jews, the Catholics, the trade unionists,
Yes.
I did not speak up because I was not one of them.
Yes.
But now when they come for me, there is no one left to speak up. And I just wonder, is this the moment in history when persons who dismissed the oppression of other people are realizing that there's something in our structure, there's something going on in Washington that in fact they have come from me, and it is time for me to stand up and become an ally of other people. Does that make sense?
Yes. And it took us too long to stand up. If you think about it, our current president showed himself to have some racist issues, and then a lot of people ignored that, and then showed himself to have some patriarchal issues, and a lot of people ignore that. And now we see some homophobia, we see some transphobia, we also see some on and off phobia against the disabled. I mean, so each time people show themselves, you have to realize they are showing you who they are. And so it's not just one person. This person is making it possible for other people who may have had hidden biases come out of the closet. And so that's what we're experiencing now. And you're right. Too many people are waiting for it to affect them. And remember what I said about privilege? You don't worry about it because it doesn't affect you. And that is the definition of privilege. And if we're all sitting here privileged, waiting for something to affect us, it's going to be too late.
Well, if you look at the spike in hate crimes over the last several years, across the board, all different kinds of groups of people. And the other thing that's I find really interesting is a lot of folks within our own community don't even realize that was it near 30 states? I don't remember the exact number. It's close to 30 states. You can still be fired from your job.
28 or
we have
something
no federal protections for. We have marriage across the country, and that's good. But
For
you
now.
get married on Saturday, put pictures on Facebook on Sunday, and get fired on Monday. In almost 30 states around the country, it's a matter of. It really is, as Ashley said at the beginning, education. I think we have a few more questions out. So why don't you go ahead and write.
Hi, I'm John Craig. I live over in Arlington, and I'm just wondering, this movie was so touching to me because so many of the people interviewed were looking carefully at how do we get to a deeper level, a moral level. I'm just wondering if we are coming to a place where you see that an education about this movement, as some of you were talking about, can really take us to a deeper level, because I fear that some young people I know today are in the internet, cycle of the same shallow relationships.
Well, I think that, you have a very good point. I mean, our community has evolved over a course of period of time, and when you talk about the relationships that people have, that's a piece that we have to really have some heart-to-heart discussions. I mean, being a single male here in DC, it's the hardest city to find somebody who's really seriously ready to make a commitment to something that is more than just, let's go and hook up for tonight. And that is not what the gay community is all about. Our movement and everything, what we're fighting for, is not just about that. It's about much more than that. And I think that we really do need to talk about that some more, but it's a place that a lot of people don't want to talk about it. And when you start having those conversations, people tune out, they zone out, they don't even think anything about it. And really, it becomes hurtful because you don't know where's your space that you can actually have those heart-to-heart conversations. And I think we've come a long way, and you do see a lot of strong relationships. And it's amazing sometimes when you see, I know we fought to have the marriage equality here and throughout the country, obviously, but there are many people who don't ever actually do that and have the strongest relationship possible. And you'll be amazed at that because you see it in so many different communities. It's because they truly have love for one another. And that's where we have to go back to, is loving ourselves as well as loving one another. And that is the piece that sometimes is missed. And that's a whole nother piece, a whole nother movie that you can put together, because that touches on so many more levels than what we usually don't want to talk about, the elephant in the room. So that's where I would say with that.
And I also think that in terms of young people and young people wanting to just be themselves in a way that they see represented through TV, through media, through the way older people model, a lot of that is just trying to fit in. And so I think there is this huge onus for young people to learn the history, whether it's LGBTQ history, race organizing in the country, the civil rights movement. But that work shouldn't just be on the young people. It's something that older people in the room, adults in the room, who have lived through it and who have learned that learning history is what gets these conversations started, and learning history and teaching history is what really motivates young folks to go out there and say, oh, we can make a difference. They did it. We can do it too. I would encourage adults in the room to really feel empowered by that, because you, just by going back and talking to the teenagers or younger people in your lives, because you can talk to them in age-appropriate ways about this, you have an opportunity to plant a seed. Going back to that, you can plant a seed in them and then help them nourish it, because they shouldn't have to do it alone. just because older generations did doesn't mean they should. And we have that knowledge now.
How many people in the room are parents? So my daughter is 13. She'll be 14 soon. And last Christmas, I don't know why it took her so long, but she said, "Mommy, I'm part of the LGBTQ community. I just don't know which letter yet." And kind of along your lines, I'm like, I don't care. Add another one. You know, I mean, we keep doing. Add an R for Rosemary. It'd be fine. And she just started GSA at her middle school in Texas. You know, and I tell her sort of stories of, you know, things that I've worked on in the community, and she reads, and but a lot of her modeling comes from her peers and a lot of social media, and what I love about her generation is that, like, her best friend is trans and he's 12, and she has other friends who are non-LGBT, and they don't care. It's not like the focus of why they care about that person. They're like, oh, and by the way, I'm trans. Oh, by the way, I'm queer. Oh, by the way,
gender
I'm a
identity
lesbian.
does not define the person.
Well, but
Or their
it does.
sexual
It
orientation.
does. But so does everything else. That they're
Not-
able
does
to
not
like live
solely
with,
define the person.
Right. They can live with a little complication, which our generation not so good at sometimes.
Right.
It was
It's really, really interesting and
It's
important.
kind of, when you think about it, the letters, and I know there's a couple other questions, but the letters, bringing in the Q was a huge struggle in our community. So many people, when they heard queer or however you questioning or whatever you use a Q for, so many people fought that. And it's kind of interesting because it was a piece of really sitting down and saying, okay, you have to get in an uncomfortable place. You know, and trying to deal with the biases that we have against certain letters, and it really shouldn't be that way. And I think now the younger generation uses it in many different ways, but it speaks to their heart. Whereas for those who are older, I'm not saying I'm in that bracket, I'm kind of in between. But
You're over here. Come on, Ashley.
Don't be ageist, Ashley. Don't be ageist.
Ashley, you're over here with the older folks.
But I mean, it's just really. I did struggle with it too, because when I was thinking of it as a kid, queer was like, or right, anything Q was like totally against us, and then now we are at a different place. So I think that is a part of it also as well.
We have time for a few more questions. You want to give him the mic? Thanks.
Yes, I'm speaking with you in reference to the educational piece. I'm in the educational field, and I have a all males group at my middle school, young men of color, and we speak about any and everything. And one of the things we spoke about, I want to say a week and a half ago, was about the gay community, and I told them that, correct me if I'm wrong, that it's a learned behavior to hate. And one of the things that we must do is to teach not to hate. Because me, the way I see it is, it's just a preference for that individual in reference to whether they want to be with a man or a woman. It's just a preference, because they still, at the end of the day, they are a man and a woman. It's just a sexual preference. So don't be hesitant about having friends who are gay, because they can teach you a lot. So these young men said, well, based off what my cousin or my uncle told me, I'm supposed to not like them. And one of the things I think we need to do, instead of educating the kid, we need to educate ourselves, the adults. Because like you just stated, the kids pay it no mind. We as adults are the ones that pay it any mind. So if we learn to educate the adult, then it will trickle down to the kid, because it's a learned it's a learned behavior from home or within their community. And you all say LGBTQ community, black community, white community. We are all one community. So we need to stop labeling ourselves as separate. That's how you conquer, by separating. So once we become one, there is no separation, there is no conquer. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have time for one more question. Actually, he's right behind you. Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Derek Petit. I'm with the Gay Professional Men of Color, but I'm also a former history teacher. One of the things actually is going towards Reverend Caldwell is, as a person in the civil rights movement, I think the lesson that should be really taught is the idea of the humanity of those leaders. I think we've raised Martin King and Bayard and then now Marsha P to God status. And so no one wants to, anyone who forms an organization, the first argument that happens, they break apart because we're not like Marsha P and we're not like, so I think one of the best ways to teach the history is to start with the humanity of it, that, as you said earlier, the lesbians and the transvestites, they get along, the gays were all, it's like, it's okay to teach that full history. We kind of teach it in a rainbow, pun, anyway, but we kind of teach it in a way of a rainbow as if they got along. And part of what I'm dealing with now, and this is what I dealt with my students, and this is kind of what I would push for if you guys, to have Reverend Caldwell or Reverend Robinson, those who have kind of come out of these things to kind of show, and even for my sister with Click It, to show that it wasn't always, it wasn't always the nice things. Like, to organize is gonna be rough sometimes. You're gonna have disagreements. So find some way to anchor on what you really want to see done, know how to argue, leave the room, and then come back the next day on that one anchor. Again, so many students are looking for that Martin King right now. They're looking for that next person, and while they're looking for that leader, their rights are being pushed back.
Many times the leader, though, may already be present in their space.
Correct.
They just may not want to acknowledge that. And just the gentleman before, I just want to say one thing, that we talk about it as being, it's discussed many times in the African American church and those types of things as being, quote, a preference of being gay, but it's not. It's who we are and what we're about. And I think that so many times we put that into the mix, and I hear that being taught or shared, and that is a concern because it is not a preference. It is our reality. It's who we are. It's who God has made us, and He's made us in His image, and He's made all of us to be different, for those who believe in that, but He's made all of us to be different and unique. And we need to accept that. And I think that that's a piece that when we go and deal with some of the historical pieces, to your point, also with, it goes back to the church. A lot of times the church, or the organized religion, I'm not trying to knock it completely, but it has caused a lot of the hatred that we know, because from the pulpit, hatred was being taught. Not always across the board in every single pulpit, but from the pulpit, that was what was being taught, both in the black and the white churches. Because if you think about it, 11 o'clock on Sunday mornings typically is the most segregated hour throughout this world, or throughout this country, all right, when we go to our churches, our respective churches. So therefore, you really have to start to really think through that, think about that. And it has had its lasting impact, especially on the people of color community in so many different ways that we don't always acknowledge it. So, thank you.
And responding to what he was saying, also, the late theologian Reinhold Niebuhr, in a book called The Irony of American History, had something that I'd like to paraphrase. He said that most of the evil is not done by evil people, but by good people who do not know that they're not good. And I think that's true for all of us. But sort of picking up on what you've said, I confess, and then I will not go public necessarily, but I wish that we were at a place where we could acknowledge, how should I put this, Dennis or Gene? Acknowledge that when in fact that all of us, there's this sex urge. And of course, the problem with us in our society is that we just don't want to talk about it, and therefore we can't talk about the fact that our parents did it to produce us. But I guess I wish that we could acknowledge, I guess let me say, as a civil rights activist, as a foot soldier, let's somehow find ways to talk about the reality of Martin King's relationships beyond, to look at that, you see. I have said as a United Methodist that I challenge very much this great phrase, celibacy and singleness, fidelity and marriage. It just seems to me, I suggest, and I finish with this, is that in the United Methodist Church we're having a real struggle. I'm saying that, of course, in 1968, when we got rid of course, the central jurisdiction of races, we developed what is called a Commission on Religion and Race. I think the church, and maybe my preacher colleagues here would agree, that what the church needs are commissions on religion and sexuality, sexual activity. But because we make it so negative, I finished with Jimmy Carter. Some of you remember his Playboy remark when, of course, someone was saying, first of all, why was he doing something in Playboy? But then he quoted scripture that suggests that whenever a person looks at a woman in lust, then that person is in fact committing an act. If in fact that were true, and if we were all judged, all of us would be in trouble. And I guess somehow I'm trying to say is that I wish Dennis or Gene would say something about this. How can we remove the negativity from the fact of sexual reality, et cetera? Dennis, would you want to comment on that? Gene?
Yeah, sure. So let me just point out a new reality, a brand new reality. According to PRRI, which is a research group around religious issues, is that every single religious community, faith community in America, a majority of the adherents to that faith are pro-LGBT, which is not to say that the hierarchical leadership of that faith community, whether it be the Vatican or it be some other governing board, is for that. But we have won the hearts of more than half of every single community. I mean, Mormons and Southern Baptists and Roman Catholics and so on and so forth. So that's the good news, right? So I think we need to get back to your question, Mr. Caldwell, I think we need to get into the seminaries, and I think we need to get into those places of leadership to change the people who are in a place to make that kind of dramatic and huge shift. Because the people in the pews are getting it. It's the people who are rising or lowering themselves to be leaders are the problem. And I think that begins in the seminary education. So the other thing is, I think that lay people need to be empowered the way we're empowering all kinds of other groups. It's time that lay people were empowered to take their rightful place in the governance of our churches and synagogues and mosques, and maybe the clergy need to listen to their people.
Well, I think that is we got one more.
No, all I was going to say is that I came to listen tonight rather than to say anything. But I think we've had a great, rich discussion. I think we just all have to realize that we're all human, and therefore I think we get in trouble when we try to make some of us less human than others. And I think the church has been guilty of that, and that's why we see so many scandals going on in the church by those who claim to be so spiritually pure or what have you. So I say what Rodney King said, can't we all learn to get along? And in doing so, can't we all accept not only our strengths, but also those things that we struggle with? And when we do that, and especially when it comes from the pulpit, I think it helps all of us to really appreciate not only the strengths, but also the things that all of us struggle with as human beings. And it's natural, it's human to be human. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I want to thank all of you for coming this evening. I would like to thank our wonderful panel. And I would especially like to thank Marilyn and Gil for their great work in this film.
Thank you.
Thank you.